got most everybody back in. So welcome to the afternoon. Bob is going to start us off with the rest of the afternoon. And I think I don't see anybody. Hopefully we have seats for everybody. If not, let me know. Raise your hand if you don't have a seat. If you're sitting in a seat, don't raise your hand. All right, because we do have a few more chairs that we can probably squeeze in. All right, everybody good? Go ahead, Bob.
All right, thanks. Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people out today. Lots of familiar faces and some new ones, too. I'm Bob, KZRNR, and we're going to talk about VHF antennas. And this will be pretty introductory, but hopefully help you with a few ideas. The first 20 minutes is really oriented towards how do I improve my HT, and then the second part talks about mobile and base antennas for VHF. And I have my lovely assistant, Joyce. Okay, so let's, you know what I did? Lovely assistant. I think I left my HT in the car. Yeah, actually, I can just borrow some. We have plenty. Do you have a rubber duck for it? Okay. That'll work. All right, thanks, Lisa. Okay, we love these handheld radios, right? They do a lot. They're all, hand check in your hand, ready to go. Little low on power, 5 watts. And I always say the best 3 ways to improve the performance of your HT is the antenna, and the antenna. So let's do just a little bit of antenna basics first. There's two antennas we talk a lot about in ham radio. One is the dipole, so you kind of see that all on the left here. Two quarter wave sections, total of a half wave. And another common antenna is the quarter wave. Basically the same idea, but I put a ground plane underneath it, and that requires a reflection, or provides a reflection off of that quarter wave. It turns out these two things basically work the same. A vertical dipole and a quarter wave vertical with ground plane give you the same kind of performance. But the key point here is with quarter wave vertical, you've got to have a ground plane or maybe some kind of counterpoise. And what do we do with typical rubber duck or typical HT? You get the rubber duck antenna. Now, Lisa has already upgraded her antenna, so she does not have the rubber duck here. But you know what they look like, right? And I call those the world's most convenient crummy antenna. Because they are very convenient, they do what they need to do, they're really great when you put it on your belt or put it in your pocket or whatever. But honestly, they're not that great of an antenna. That's why some people get frustrated with performance. It's basically a shortened vertical radiator. I'll show you a couple pictures in a second. And it suffers from the no ground plane problem. It's trying to be kind of like a quarter wave vertical, although it's too short. It's like height challenge. And it doesn't have the ground plane underneath it. I've measured a whole bunch of these rubber ducks, and they do vary. Some are much better than others, but I'd say on average they're about 8 dB worse than a dipole. So that's pretty poor. Here's some this is the rubber duck. Here's some pictures. This is off Baofeng. I tore it apart and tore the thing off. You can see it's just a coil coming up through there. Here's a little bit different one. That one I think came off a Yaesu. You can see the construction's a little better and a little different. That's what your rubber duck is. So a lot of times people go to this thing. They say, I know what the problem is. This probably isn't going to fit. The rubber duck's just too short, so I'm going to get a longer one. So there's all kinds of different antennas that are about 19 inches long, right? Because that's a quarter wave for 2 meters. This one I think also works on 70 centimeters, and sometimes they'll put a little tuning gizmo in the middle to help with that. This one does not have that. These, I'll use these sometimes. They're a little bit better than a rubber duck, but actually they're not that great because they don't have a ground plane. So what can you do about that ground plane? Well, one thing that people like to do is okay, I can't have a ground plane, but I'll have a counterpoise. So basically have a wire hanging off my HT that touches the outside shell of my antenna connector, and I make it about a quarter wavelength long for 2 meters, and these things really do work. You can buy these, you can make them yourself. They actually do pretty well. And if you think about it, if I have a wire hanging down, I got a quarter wave up and a quarter wave wire down, I sort of have a dipole, don't I? Right? Got my half-wave dipole there. And if that works for you, that's a great solution. Even with the rubber duck, it works pretty well. I don't like wires hanging down. What I like are these half-wave antennas, and I've got a number of them. This is MFJ, I think. 2 meter half-wave, obviously pretty small right here, and if I extend it, it's a half-wave on 2 meters. And it turns out, if you remember half-wave, I think I've heard that before. Oh, it's basically the same thing as a half-wave dipole, except we're going to, instead of feeding it from the center like a lot of your typical dipole, we're going to feed it from the end. And sure enough, inside here is a little matching network, because when you feed a half-wave from the end, it's a high impedance point. It's not 50 ohms, so you got to have something in there. But MFJ has worked all that out for us, and so these things work remarkably well, much better than your rubber duck. What's the disadvantage? Well, you might poke your eye out or poke somebody's eye out. I've also broken quite a few of these. Need to be gentle with them, because if you do things like go to put it away and just sort of smash them together, I've kinked them, and so they aren't the sturdiest thing in the world, but they work really well. And then a few years ago, okay, that's a picture of the MFJ extended and collapsed. And then a few years ago, I discovered this one on Amazon, and it's the two-way radio RH770. It is also a half-wave, but it's got the tuning coil in the center, which people ask me what that is. I always say that's the magic lump that lets it work on 70 centimeters while it also works on 2 meters. And I've tested these and compared them to other antennas. These actually work quite well, and they are still $17 delivered to your doorstep if you're on Amazon Prime. And that is what Lisa has installed on her radio. Okay, another really cool antenna is the roll-up J-pole. And I've got one of those here. They're about 54 inches long. You can hang it up in the tree. You can, if you don't like this flopsy look, you can put it inside a piece of plastic pipe. You can hang it from a fishing pole. You can hang it in a window. Like if you have a tall window, you can sort of put this at the top. And what this thing is, it really is a half-wave radiator, along with a quarter-wave tuning stub. So again, you got a half-wave that's going to radiate just like a dipole. We're feeding it from the end, so we have an impedance matching problem, and the quarter wave matching stub takes care of that for us. Pretty common design. I actually bought this one off of eBay. There are many vendors out there that make them, or you can build one yourself. Here's one particular design I found on the internet, and you could get some. That says 300 ohm twin lead. This is ladder line, but this is a really handy thing to have in your kit. You know that I'm out camping, okay, and I string this up in a tree or something. Yeah, question.
So when you were looking to buy an antenna for a handheld, is it just this one standard? You can buy any antenna, it'll match up to any handheld, or are there like ones that match for this manufacturer and that manufacturer, or there's different standards for them?
Yeah, good question. For the most part, any antenna will work with any handheld.
Okay.
The thing, though, we'll talk in a minute about connectors. You want to make sure you got the right connector. Good question, thanks. So anyway, this is a good thing to have in your kit. Camping, hiking. I've used this for SOTA once in a while, where I just want to put up a Omni antenna, because I don't want to worry about having to point anything. I'll just string this up in the trees, and it works quite well. Okay, mag mount antenna, and in particular this quarter wave mag mount antenna. So we've got, again, it's about 19 inches, right? So it's quarter wave on 2 meters, and it's got this coil in the center. That is another magic lump that makes this thing work, allows this thing to work pretty well on both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. So that's all good. If you have your HT in the car, you're basically inside a metal box, right, for most vehicles. And so you really want to get your antenna outside of that car. This is an easy way to do that. You plop it on top of the roof. Hopefully you have a metal roof, and then you can tell. I bring this in through the door. It's been a little bit mangled over the years, but it's still workable. And you bring it through the door or the window, either one, and then you connect up this guy to your antenna, or to your HT. Sorry. Oh, this is a really handy thing to have for other reasons too. You're at home, you just plop this sucker on top of a metal filing cabinet, or like here, I could just plop it on top of that cart. This thing also needs a quarter wave, or it needs a ground plane. And that's not going to make a great ground plane, but it's going to be adequate. I've taken these things and just plopped them against metal door frames like over there, on top of the refrigerator, whatever works. So it's, I'd say this is another handy thing to have in your kit. It's just a nice flexible antenna you can use for lots of things. Okay, antenna mounting. I thought this one was pretty clever. I think, anybody do this in their attic with just a piece of sheet metal? Yeah, in the back there. You can take a mag mount antenna, get yourself a big piece of sheet metal, plop it down, and now you got an attic antenna. Of course, it can't be aluminum, right? Because aluminum's not going to attract to the magnet, so it's got to be steel or some ferrous metal, I guess. And then here's Joyce and I out doing summits on the air. Would you like to pull up the Yagi antenna there? So this is that 3-element Yagi shown in the picture. It's all wrapped up right there, so we can stick it in our packs. But would you mind assembling that for me? That's actually her usual job. It's like, here's the antenna. Why don't you put it together while I fiddle around with other radio stuff? This thing has gain of about 6 dB. It's made by the Aero Antenna Company. Their stuff is pretty good, and they're called the Aero Antenna Company because the elements are actually made out of arrow shafts. That's kind of the construction method that they like to use, and it works pretty well. They're all threaded and everything. There's another look at it, 3 elements, arrowantennas.com. Okay, antenna connectors. Yeah, you do need to be worried about which connector you have on your HT. Back in the old days, a lot of HTs had BNCs, but they're really fading out now, right? Usually these days you have SMA connectors are the most common. And of course, we can't just have one SMA connector, we have 2, right? We've got the SMA male and the SMA female. Most of the Japanese radios tend to go with SMA female. Most of the Chinese ones go with SMA male. That's not universally true, but you definitely if you're buying any kind of connectors, cables, antennas, whatever, make sure you get the right one. There's an SMA on a cable. And for HT stuff, right, we're not going to be using the PL259s, right? We're going to use something smaller. Just a touch on coaxial cables. You may need to buy some cables to hook things up. For HT kind of work, we're going to typically have short cables, right? We're probably not going to be running a long distance. And we want it to be small and convenient, so that kind of points us to RG58 or maybe RG8X. It's not that much bigger. We're probably not going to use the bigger cables for this. Make sure they're 50 ohms. I noticed there's a lot of good sources for pre-made cables, which is probably what you want to do for this kind of application. You can go to HRO or any of those. Amazon has a whole bunch of cables. Watch out for quality variation, and I notice sometimes they'll get really loose about whether it's a 50 ohm cable or whether it's a 70 ohm cable. You really want to make sure you got 50 ohms. And we have our 2-meter Yagi. Step into the picture. So there's our 2-meter Yagi antenna. So it didn't take too long to put together. And let's see, let's hold it vertical for vertical polarization, and horizontal for horizontal. It does both. It does everything. Yeah, this antenna's been a lot of places. You can tell it's well worn. Okay, thank you. If you don't have the right connector, there's all kinds of adapters out there. You can always adapt it. You just have to kind of be careful what you order, that you get exactly what you wanted. And then this is kind of a handy deal here. A short cable can really keep the strain off of your HT connector, right? It gives it a little more flexibility. Okay, so that's the HT. How do I make my HT better piece? Rubber duck antenna is fine. It's convenient and crappy. Antennas are a great way to improve your signal. Pay attention to cables and connectors. Just try some things. You'll be surprised what works. Yeah, John.
You mentioned the Tiger Tail and the MFG's telescope one. How do those two compare?
Let's see. The Tiger Tail with a quarter wave is going to give you a pretty decent dipole, and so it's going to be about the same as the telescopic half wave, right? You see this recurring theme, right? If I get to it, I always say, never underestimate getting a half wave radiator up in the air, right? That's kind of a basic antenna that works really well. And so in this case, you might get there with the Tiger Tail, or you might get there with the half wave telescopic thing. Yes?
Is there a person down that sells radio stuff, or like adapters or something?
Yeah.
There's one more.
No, this is our world these days. I mean, Radio Shack's pretty much gone. There's just not a lot. So most people are doing mail order, Amazon, HRO, or run up to HRO in Denver. You need to go up there anyway and look at all the radios. Yeah.
What's the best HT that you've found that works great?
What's the best HT I've found? There is no best HT. It depends what you want to do. I think, like a lot of, I'm not exactly anti-Baofeng. Just understand when you buy a $30 radio, you get a $30 radio. I try and encourage people to move up to like a Yaesu FT4, which has, I'd say, similar technology to the Baofeng, but they implemented it a lot better. So, but it's over twice the price. It's about $90. So that'd be a good choice. There's also an FT65 that's very similar. And then you sort of get into kind of the high-end HTs, which do D-Star, DMR, have APRS built in and all that. That's probably not your first radio, right? That's maybe later, depending on what you're interested in.
was just over at HRO this Wednesday, and their shop is full of equipment, and they're happy to show you any of the HTs that they have in stock.
Yeah, HRO is a great shop.
And antennas, and they have a nice one. I think you mentioned in the class, the diamond vertical.
Yeah, yeah. So HRO is a great place to go. It's not huge. It's kind of this small storefront.
It's full.
But it's amazing what they have there. And my experience is the staff there is really great and friendly and will answer all your questions. Yeah.
When I'm being slowed, I want to monitor sometimes as I'm hiking up. So I'll take that MFJ halfway and just reduce it down to the 19 inches.
Yeah.
And let it act like a 19-inch until I get to the summit and it won't be hitting branches. On the doodle band one that you showed, could you do the same thing? Could you just do the 19? Would it act the same way? Would it?
Yeah, it probably, pretty much work. Or something like this might be, it's another thing to have.
Right, I could do it, yeah. And then do the with that, let it just angle off.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, one more question.
What are those names? I mean, you're gonna buy one. How would you need?
Well, look for roll-up J-pole on,
Okay, got it. Okay, that's fine. I just wondered how you looked at it.
and actually, I think when I was looking around for this, I found a lot more vendors on eBay. And then KB3 KAI, I think, is one of those. There's another guy too. There's a bunch of them out there. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going then. Thanks for those questions. Okay, now we'll talk about mobile and base station antennas for VHF and UHF. First thing to be sure about is polarization really matters, right? So in general, we're going to use vertical polarization for FM, right? Your HT is sort of naturally vertically polarized. It's pretty handy to put a vertical thing on your car for mobile. And the same is true for DMR, D-Star, use diffusion and all that. They tend to be omnidirectional antennas, right? So just put it up, put the antenna up, and I'm going to radiate equally in all directions. And then for single sideband, CW, kind of weak signal work, we tend to use horizontal polarized antennas. So, for example, this is another Yagi made by Arrow. And of course, like this, it's vertically polarized like that. It's horizontally polarized. So we'll take that up on the SOTA summits and use that. If you do get into Yagi antennas, now you got to be concerned with rotating and pointing it, right? So you may have to install a rotor or something like that. So the complexity does go up. So we already talked about this one, right? That's that quarter wave mag mount, 18 inches tall, really handy. So that's a vertically polarized antenna. You'll hear about this thing called the NMO mount. And it's NMO stands for New Motorola. So at some point in time, Motorola developed this mount. And as shown here, this is actually a magnetic mount here with the NMO base on it. And then here's the antenna itself with the NMO. So I basically have the same thing here. And I really like this system. It was developed for land mobile radio, and it has all kinds of different mounts and antennas. And so I've got an array of different antennas I can mix and match with different mounts. Here's kind of the original NMO mount, and it's designed to, this outer ring comes off, and you punch or drill a 3/4 inch hole in the roof of your car. I was hoping you'd all guess. And then that thing screws on nice and tight, makes a weather seal. It really is a pretty good mount. Yeah, the 3/4 inch hole scares people, right? Now Joyce has an NMO mount on the roof of her car. It did not scare her from having. Well, she didn't let me install it. We found somebody that does that. Here's another NMO mount. It's a little, you see it's got a little clip hangover thing here that'll hook onto like a trunk lip. So if you know, for those of you that still have sedans, right, they're not as popular, you put a little trunk lip mount there. And then there are all kinds of mounts made by companies like Comet and Diamond that have like little levers and hinges and stuff that they can move around. So this would be really good for like putting on the back of an SUV, like on the hatch, or you could put it probably on the hood, the edge of a hood of a car, that sort of thing. Here's one that's a luggage mount, luggage rack mount kind of thing. You see it has a little bigger bolts there. You can bolt that onto a luggage rack. And then this is actually one of the most flexible things. It's just an L-shaped bracket, but you can use that in a variety of locations. In particular, you can with 3 sheet metal screws, you can attach that to like the side of your trunk or up around your hood, something like that. So here's some actual antennas. This is kind of a longer one. I think it's a Larson, made for 2 meters and 70 centimeters. You'll notice a lot of these antennas come dual band, right? Because you got a dual band radio. I just want one antenna that handles both of those. Let's see. Yeah, in a second. This is. Let's see. I think this is a Diamond. Yeah. This came from Diamond. It's dual band. It's got a couple of magic lumps in there doing something to support those multiple bands. This one is that Larson I mentioned earlier. That's a real popular and solid design. Again, handles 70 centimeters and 2 meters. Let's see, these are, this one is actually a half wave. It's a little bit unique, and it still has the NMO mount. And the key element or the key idea there is it's like a vertical dipole, so it does not need a ground plane. And so sometimes when I'm installing a radio in a place where I know the ground plane is going to be questionable, I'll go ahead and use one of these half waves. Tends to work better. And this is actually a 6 meter antenna. Larson has a whole bunch of different single band antennas you can get that'll cover pretty much any frequency. And for a while I was running 6 meter mobile, so I had this antenna. They're all NMO mounts. Oh, sorry, I clicked through. All right, so we got that. NMO antennas. Here's your classic mount on the roof of a truck, right? Again, 3/4 inch hole through the roof. Here's that L bracket, also on a truck. It's right up on the driver's side front fender. Now, if you're paying attention, you go, "Oh, that doesn't look like a very good spot for an antenna. There's no ground plane underneath it. It's kind of down on there." It's like, yep, every antenna installation is a compromise. And for this one, I chose to keep the antenna kind of low profile. Gets in and out of the garage, no problem, this sort of thing. Here's one of those fancier mounts that this was a very angled situation, so it's basically a forward transit band. And so I attached that right there, and then the fact that it could angle up let me orient the antenna. Again, not a great place for an antenna, right? Would have been much better to be like on the roof of that van. Yeah.
That, now, is that connected to the ground plane on that truck? In other words, is it isolated from that amount, or is it?
Here?
For a ground plane. The truck I can use a ground plane?
Yeah, so that is electrically and mechanically connected to the body of that truck.
Okay, it's not isolated.
And so it'll have conductivity out to the hood there, to some extent. Yeah, thank you. This one's kind of unique, through glass antennas. Anybody ever use one of these? Did it work for you? No?
For CV, yeah.
Here's a guy that throws you up. Daryl, did it work for you? Yeah, Joyce used to have one of these on her car, previous car, it worked pretty well for her. I know a friend of mine stuck one on the back of like a Jeep Cherokee, on the side window. And so what it is you have this piece is glued on the outside, this piece is glued on the inside and through the window. And so it's capacity coupled so that the signal can get through, and it's no holes required, right? And then there are issues, you definitely don't want to do that on a tinted window, because typically the windows will have conductivity or whatever.
Does the defrost affect that? No, it's got to do with that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that where the defrost wires are, that'd be bad. So some people think these are terrible, and some have had good luck. It's one of those kind of situations. We've had good luck with them. Okay, now we'll shift to base antennas at home. Again, we're going to think in terms of, all those mobiles I showed you were just vertical, right? Vertical antennas, vertically polarized. We'll stay on that vertical theme for a while, and then we'll also talk about horizontal. So, Keith, I don't know if this is what you're talking about. The Diamond X50 is really popular.
I think now X300.
It's about this tall, and it covers 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and it's got multiple elements inside. I don't know exactly what the configuration is. About $100. Really, lots of people buying those. Arrow has this kind of traditional ground plane antenna with one vertical sticking up, and instead of a real ground plane, they put out these radials, and they have an extra vertical element, so it works on 2 meters and 440, so that's a nice antenna. A lot of people like these J-poles. I said the roll-up J-pole was made with ladder line. This is also a J-pole, and the idea is there's a halfway radiator, and then you've got, in fact, this is not the scale, it actually goes a lot higher, 58 inches tall. And then you've got this other piece that is your quarter wave tuning stub, and they also put in a smaller piece in there that lets it work on both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. There's lots of plans out there to build these yourself. Some of them are made out of copper water pipe. I don't think they're very pretty, but if you're going to put it in an attic or something, who cares? Some antennas are really pretty. So back to the Yagi, more correctly called a Yagi Uda antenna. 2 Japanese guys invented it. And then let's start looking at some of the horizontal options. Now, most of your mobile antennas are vertically oriented, which they do make some loops. This is the M squared. It's not really a loop, right? It's actually more of a square. But M squared 2 meter loop antenna. It's omnidirectional and it is horizontally polarized. So at one point I had this on top of our Jeep Cherokee. So when I was out doing VHF contesting rovers, I could drive around with horizontal polarization. You'll see these once in a while.
It's like a Moxie.
Yeah, it's like a squared off Moxie, I guess. And then of course you get into your Yagis, 4-element Yagi, you get about 9.6 dBi gain. About $160. I've been surprised in the last few months looking up prices on antennas that use aluminum or other metals. They're getting expensive. They've definitely gone up in price. And then you get a little bit longer. Here's a 9-element from M squared. M squared makes great antennas, 14 dBi gain. And would you like to demonstrate our Yagi we have here, our other Yagi? So come over this way. So I actually don't remember the manufacturer on this. I found it on the Cheap Ham website. But it's a 2-meter Yagi with 7 elements. And I got that for portable operation, like you throw it in the back of the car, go out to some mountaintop or whatever. A little big for summits on the air. I guess I could dismantle it, but
Yeah, I'll just carry it.
okay, that's good. So you're starting to get into a little more size here. That's one of the things about VHF antennas. The elements are small, but you start stacking them up, you can get some pretty good size beams. This one, I'm going to say it's probably like 14 feet long, right? And that, if you're a serious weak signal contester, you'd consider that antenna small. I've been looking at some that have booms of like 25 feet long, so they get pretty big. And maybe you stack them up, right? More than one. And then 6 meters, we have a similar kind of thing. You can get these halos or the square loop, HO loop. Pretty common antenna is like a 3-element, 6-meter Yagi. It's not too terribly big to manage, but it does a nice job. And of course, you can get longer. This is the 5-element. Get a little more gain, and I think that one's about 14 feet long as well. So you're starting to. And they make bigger ones, right? You see some huge antenna arrays, but from a beginner kind of standpoint, these are the kind of things you might consider. Okay, we talked about vertical and horizontal polarization. There is a type of antenna called circular polarized, and they're very popular on the satellites because if I'm circular polarized and the polarization changes on the satellite, the antenna picks up everything pretty well. It sort of doesn't care what the polarization is. And these are basically Yagis with 2 sets of elements set at right angles. So that's another thing to think about. You can actually set these up to be 2 separate Yagis, a vertical and horizontal. You could run one of these vertical and the other horizontal if you preferred that. Okay, back to antenna mounting. There's our mag mount in the attic. Here's somebody put a Comet GP3. I think it's probably more like this tall, maybe 4.5 feet. And he mounted it up in the attic. Attic antennas are always a compromise, right? They're not as good as having it outdoors. If you have a metal roof, don't put an antenna in your attic, you'll just be frustrated. And then when you mount it like this, you want to keep it away from as much metal as possible, right? Wires or heating and air conditioning stuff, whatever. Here's, used to be on our roof in Monument with, there's a tripod underneath there attached to the roof, a manual TV antenna was there, and just kind of traditional TV antenna mounting stuff. Here's a really nice one by Mr. Dan. He built a little custom mount here to sort of get his antenna out and around the rain gutter, so he's above that metal, which is good. And it's really nice installation. You know, would have been better to be like on the peak of the roof of the house, yeah, I suppose, but this works pretty well.
Wait, so how do you get it inside then?
How'd you get it inside? You run the coax down, you come way down here, and you probably punch a hole through the wall. You probably should ground it before it comes in the house. What about grounding? Greg already talked about this a bit, and I'm just going to say I'm in favor of grounding. That's about it. And you know, really, we're trying to provide a path to ground because lightning and things like that will find its way to ground, and if you can help it along, that's probably better than having it at the side when it's Let's see, just real quickly on transmission lines, those are the three main categories, right? So now if you start getting into putting up a significant antenna on your house, and the coax line, run is long, like if it's more than 25 feet, then you want to be thinking about keeping the loss down as much as possible, because especially like at UHF frequencies, the feed line loss goes up pretty quickly. So you're going to be wanting a larger coax, and there are low loss coaxes specifically that are particularly good for the VHF, UHF. Just to give you an idea real quick, so if you install a 50-watt 2-meter FM transceiver on the roof of your house, 30-foot run of coaxial cable, if you used RG58, you would lose half your power in that cable at 440 megahertz. And you can drop that down to like 1 dB.
How much more expensive is that?
Oh, it's just slightly more expensive. No, it's a lot more expensive. These cables are going up in price too. Let's see. So I think that's it. Antenna polarization matters. Mobile antennas are usually vertical. Base stations can be vertical and horizontal. Really, it depends on what you're trying to do. And pay attention to that loss in cables, particularly as you go higher in frequency. Honestly, at HF, it's much less of a big deal. You get up above 140 megahertz, and the losses go way up. Questions?
I've seen where they advertise 5/8 wave antenna. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, 5/8 wave antenna. I think this one is actually a 5/8 wave antenna on 2 meters. And why not a quarter wave? Why not a half wave? It turns out instead of a half wave, if you make it a little bit longer, you can actually get more signal directed to the horizon. And then because it's not a half wave, it has to have a little bit of inductance added down here to make sure the match is good. But that's all designed into the antenna. So it'll give you a little bit more gain than a half wave. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for base station 220 antennas?
That's a good question. 220 being you thinking vertical or? I really don't know. Do you have a?
I saw him did a presentation back during the COVID era, and he was working on the
Oh. Yeah.
So he might have to.
Yeah, that's the Ed Fong makes a whole bunch of antennas. You know what else? I think Comet and Diamond have tri-band antennas. I think they drop the 220 band into those sometimes, but you end up buying a tri-band to get 220 vertical. Could always build a homemade quarter wave antenna. That wouldn't be too hard to do.
Ed Fong is a professor in Berkeley, and you don't know how to modify those
I met him at a swap fest. I thought he was okay. Okay, I'm moving on my time, so let's stop there. Thank you very much.